Welcome to PS224, the Organic Laboratories. As you enter the organic laboratory door, you will see that the room is divided into two sections. There are 4 hoods on one side and 4 on the other side, where 7 are operational for students in this lab. On the right side, as you enter the lab, you will see an ice machine, eye wash station, and shower. There are 4 other eye wash stations, one at each sink between the hoods. The ice machine has a scoop that should always be returned to the top of the ice machine when done. Each student or student groups will have their own hood, and these hoods are numbered. For example, this is hood number 8. Between the hoods is a sink with DI water, regular water, and an eye wash station. At each station are risers with materials such as scissors, laptop stands, and some non-hazardous materials for the lab. Each hood are materials that are shared or solely for the students using that hood. This includes vacuum pumps, which are shared, and vacuum pump traps, solvents that you can see in the back, and clamps, hot plates, and so on are contained in this hood. All experiments should be done in these hoods unless explicitly said not to by your professor. The door to the hood should remain closed when not in use, and the glass sash should be down to the operating levels when in use. Back right is the IR, the computer for the IR, the oven, and the first aid kit, as well as gloves. Always check that the appropriate temperature is set on the oven. To open and close the oven, screw the knob. Never leave the oven open. This door leads to the advanced lab with some other instrumentation. On the other side of the lab is the polarimeter, refractometer, and an additional computer for your use. Do not place anything within the taped areas of the polarimeter, and always sign the logbook next to any instrument. You will see that on this side of the lab is the waste accumulation and dispensing hood. The instructor station is in the front of the lab by the board. Next to hood number 1 is the refrigerator. You'll see on this side of the lab again that there are 4 hoods, and on each bench is the balances, mel temps, and between the hoods is the sink with the eye wash station, DI water, and regular water, as well as paper towels, soap, and brushes. At each station are drawers. In the Chemistry of Food and Cooking course, there are 1 drawer for each student or student groups. For the organic students, there are 2 drawers. For the organic students, their drawers are separated by 1 for glassware and 1 for equipment. Please keep these drawers organized as you're sharing them with other students. The initial images you see here are quite disorganized drawers, so you should stack beakers and place them to the side. Round bottom flash, small Erlenmeyers, watch glasses, etc. must be placed in small bins. Large glassware, like you can see here, are placed in the middle of the drawer. The only glassware labeled in the organic drawers is the TLC chamber. Each session in lab, you should clean glassware you intend to use and return them clean to the drawer. It is not always necessary to dry them when returning them to the drawer. In the other drawer, you have your non-glassware material, but that also includes your microscale kit, which has several other pieces of glassware present in there, but on a smaller scale. Some labs may require students to store material for subsequent weeks. It is not ideal to store anything in your station drawer. Hence, each professor will have a drawer for their students to store samples until the lab is complete. These samples must be cleaned once the experiment is done, and the valves must be returned. Avoid storing anything other than storage files with your samples in these drawers. In the chemical dispensing and waste hood, you will find materials separated by your course and one bin for common reagents. Do not use any chemical not intended for your course. Some extra bottles of solvent may also be found in this area. You will dispose of chemicals in accordance to your lab manual and your professor. Please try to keep the chemicals organized and in their correct location. Additional equipment such as monowaves, which are used in the majors labs or advanced labs. With the balances, please clean the balances after use. If you spill any materials, use the brushes available to clean up. Weigh papers are provided next to or on the balances. In this lab, you will use a laptop, tablet, or a phone. There are laptop or tablet stands available for you to use. Please use them to prevent any spills or any chemicals from getting on your devices. There is a spill kit and first aid kit in the corner of the room. Before using this, please notify your professor first, as they may need to complete an accident form if you have any cuts that are a result of an accident. However, if you have any safety issues outside of this, please always contact your professor. In the neighboring room, which is the advanced lab, this is where we're going to find other instrumentation that might be applicable to your lab. This, for instance, is the GC mass spectrometer. The last thing is the broken glass box. Please place all broken glass or melting point tubes in this box. Always use a brush to get broken glass and never use your finger. So the second half of the video will talk about laboratory safety. Please follow any additional guidance that is given to you by your professor. It is very important that you pay attention to safety rules. Safety is an obligatory topic that has to be discussed before you can work in the lab. So even if you worked in a lab previously, every time you start a new science course, you need to go through safety training. In this tutorial, we'll talk about kind of an overview of the safety in the lab. You saw some of the safety equipment at the beginning of this video, like the safety shower, the eye wash stations. However, it's not a replacement for reading your safety contract or any safety rules for each of the labs. This is not an extensive list and by no means is a reason not to comply with your professor. There are times that your professor will have additional guidance that is separate from this instruction. In general, please note that your laboratory professor may ask you to leave the lab if you violate any of these rules, and you may be given 0 for that day. Firstly, there is no food or drink in the lab. It's also not acceptable to eat or drink in the lab, so don't come with food in your mouth. That includes chewing gum. One of the safety reasons that students oftentimes don't think of with bringing food into the lab is that, especially in this laboratory, which is organic chemistry, organic particles easily can get into your material. They can go through plastics oftentimes, and the vapors go through your material. So students are not allowed to work in the lab when your professor is not present. Only students who are registered for that lab and that section are allowed to be in the section. You must have on eye protection as soon as you get into that lab. No questions asked. Your lab professor can easily send you out of the lab at any point in time you are not putting on your safety goggles. If you need to wipe your eyes or you need to take your goggles off at any point in time because they're fogging or anything like that, you are able to leave the lab without asking your professor's permission if you just need to clear your goggles. Keep your hands away from your face every time you're working, because your face is one of the more sensitive parts of your body, and anything that you get on your face could be hazardous. Wash your hands as soon as you're done with lab, and definitely before you leave the lab, you should wash your hands, because anything that's on your hands will go with you home. Do not wear any of your protective gear, your PPE, outside of the lab, and that includes if you wear any lab coats, your goggles, your gloves, because they do contain chemicals. Always keep your workstation neat and clean, and be prepared before you come to lab for doing the lab. This is where the majority of hazards lie, is in the lack of preparation. If you do not know what it is that you're coming in to do, you will ultimately be unsafe to yourself and everybody else. Know when there is emergency by paying attention, also what to do in an emergency. And so I'll quickly go through these things. So proper PPE, personal protective equipment, also includes proper dress. So you need to come into lab properly dressed, but when you're in lab, you need to be wearing your goggles, and when appropriate, you wear gloves. And so here are some examples. So eye protection does not mean your regular reading glasses or whatever kind of glasses, nor safety glasses appropriate for an organic lab because of the vapors. So you need to be wearing safety goggles. And safety goggles look like what you see on the screen right here. Are appropriate to prevent vapors from getting in your eye. So even if something splashes, it should not get into your eye. So you may still need to wash your face, but you should not have to wash your eyes unless something gets in there. You can wear these with prescription glasses, and you can wear them with your contact lenses. However, contact lenses should not be worn in the lab if possible. Now, you can wear it. If possible, please wear glasses instead. The reason for this is not because it's that we're looking for protection for your eyes per se, because contact lenses can't do that. And your goggles can help you to prevent exposure, but it's still a slight risk of contamination if any vapors get through your goggles, or even if you have a splash and something drips into your goggles. Contact lenses add an additional safety hazard. If you are wearing contact lenses, please let your instructor know on your safety contract. And please, before coming into lab, if you are going to take them out before entering the lab. Do not take your contact lenses off in the lab, or they need to be discarded of. If anything splashes in your eye at any point in time, you do need to discard those contact lenses. If you want, you are allowed to wear lab coats. It's not required for these labs. Actually, lab aprons are pretty good and probably the best prevention, because things will drip off of them, whereas lab coats are for minor things. So if you splash things on your lab coat, you could still be contaminated, whereas plastic rubber aprons are not usually susceptible to that. This is where most students make the biggest mistake, is closed-toed shoes. This is not Mary Jane's or any of those other things, and I'll show you examples. Closed-toed shoes, need to be worn at all times during the lab. If you're wearing sandals, cloth sneakers, perforated shoes, those are not allowed for safety reasons because liquids can get through them very easily. All of these are not allowed. So these little Crocs, a lot of people love them, but they have lots of little holes and the backs are not covered. A lot of people make the mistake about these because they are closed-toed, they're closed in the back, but it doesn't cover the tops of your feet. These should not be worn unless you're wearing socks with them. And of course, bare feet, definitely not allowed. These are examples of shoes that are definitely allowed into the lab. Now, many sneakers are somewhat cloth, but try to avoid ones that are like really thin types of cloth material. But gloves are a good safety equipment, a piece of that you can use. However, they're not necessary all the time. Do not just walk into the lab and throw on a pair of gloves. There are reasons why we don't want you to just randomly be wearing gloves. One of them is actually because it's an environmentally unsustainable practice to just constantly be wearing gloves for absolutely no reason. So some of your labs will not necessarily require that you wear gloves, or not require that you wear gloves all the time. I must stress, though, that if you spill chemicals on your gloves, you should go wash your gloves. Those gloves are not meant to be impenetrable permanently. They're just a short-term barrier. So in general, if you do not come appropriately dressed, your instructor, depending on the lab, might give you some time to go home, get dressed, and come back and do your lab. If you're chronically doing this, you may just be asked to be dropped from the lab. Typically, if it's your second offense, you will just be sent home and given a 0. And if you keep doing this, you may actually be reported to the dean and may be dropped from the course for safety reasons. Goggles can be obtained from the American Chemical Society students, and if you don't have a chance to get to them, you can usually buy them online or through the bookstore. Tie your hair back if you have long hair. Anything that can move and get anywhere, definitely if it's anything that's past your ears, it definitely needs to be tied back. If it can be tied back, tie it back. Using hairspray, gels, or mousse is not a good enough way to tie your hair back, as well as they're extremely flammable. So that being your option is actually the worst thing you can do. Wear clothing that fits. So I want you to wear appropriate clothing that covers your body, but if it's too loose, it may also get into things and may get trapped on things. So sometimes having loose clothing, they can get trapped on corners of tables and doorknobs, and that can cause accidents. Also, anything that's cut off too high, where if you stretch your stomach shows or your legs show, that is not an appropriate thing to do. I strongly recommend wearing socks, even if your feet are completely covered, because you will be standing quite a bit, and it does provide extra padding for your time in the lab, but it also provides extra protection of your ankles, which tends to be the spot on your legs that things do get spilled if you spill or break something. Try to wear comfortable shoes. 3-inch heels is really not very comfortable after 2 hours in the lab. Wearing clothing that is somewhat breathable, so natural fibers like cotton are helpful, because moving and doing things in the lab, sometimes you can get quite warm. But I would also, although it's not on here, I would recommend bringing a sweater with you, because sometimes the lab can actually be on the opposite side and get really cold. It is suggested that you wear clothing that you don't care so much about. This is not the time to be wearing your $3,000 Gucci shirt, because little tiny splatters of chemicals could get on your clothes, and then it might ruin them. Also, if you don't want to wear the lab clothes that you need to wear, you can bring clothes with you and change before coming into the lab, so change in the bathroom. It's also a good idea that you do that if you want to have spare clothing as well, but it's not mandatory. You can wear jewelry, but it's not advisable. So I strongly recommend don't wear valuable jewelry in the lab in case you damage it. But I definitely recommend that you avoid wearing jewelry if you can to the lab in general. So the general safety equipment that we have is first aid kit. Please make sure that you contact your professor before using any of the safety equipment. The dust broom and the broken glass container you can use at any point in time that you'd like to use them without contacting your professor, but you should let your professor know that something is broken. Fume hoods are our mechanism in lab to help prevent you from having fumes and flammables too close to you. So you'll do most of your experimentation in the hoods. Sinks also have eye wash stations, as you saw before. The sink is where you'll wash all your glassware. It will also be the place that you wash your arms and hands, especially in the case of spilling. Safety showers, hopefully you'll never need to use them, but safety showers, you saw in the video, we had one safety shower. This is not something that you run and use yourself. You notify your professor will help you. And this is only for major spills. So minor things can easily be treated otherwise, because this is not a fun thing to do, to have 15 minutes of this cold water. And sometimes it's not, because the water sits for a long time, isn't actually very clean water, can run over your body. And so the other thing is the eye wash stations. Wear your goggles at all times, because this is not the most pleasant experience for most students to have to flush their eyes for about 15 minutes at the station. If an alarm goes off, if it's a fire alarm, you will exit the building and go to the Branscombe parking lot, and I'll talk about that in a second. If it's the storm, then you go to the basement. Sometimes there are other locations that might we might be sent to, but follow your instructor's information when told to. If something happens to another student, unless you are CPA certified, please do not try to do anything to any student, no matter how desperate you think that they are, because you could be causing more harm to them. Like I said, broken glass goes in a broken glass container. If you spill anything, those quickly need to be picked up. If it's small, you can use paper towels. If it's large, please contact your professor. If there's a fire, please shout for help for your professor immediately. This is not a place that you need to play around with, because this is a lab with a lot of organics that can catch on fire. So please let them know. They'll usually cover it, because most of the time it's small fires. If it's large, then we'll need to evacuate the building. When you need to evacuate, there are a couple of steps that you need to do. One, turn off all flames or plug out all hot plates. There's usually no flames in our lab, by the way, and plug out any other electronic or electric equipment. Follow any instructions that your professor gives you. You can, if you have time, if it's not something where you're going to die immediately, you want to maybe quickly, not slowly pack and organize your bags, but you may want to pack your bags or get your car keys, your dorm keys, because sometimes these things can be 5 minutes, sometimes they can be 5 hours, and you may not want to be stranded in the building or near the building, or even on campus if you live off campus. Walk calmly out the door. This is not a time to run. Sometimes running makes things worse. And this is not a time to decide to take the elevator unless you have a handicap. And then you're going to exit and go to the location that you need to be in. If there's any injuries, which most injuries are caused because you're not following safety instructions, you need to notify your professor immediately. Injuries that result from medical issues, such as fainting and seizing and things like that, those are oftentimes caused because a student has some sort of illness, which the professor needs to be notified of immediately. Your professor may call safety or ask you to call safety or someone to call safety, and then they may call 911 while they're trying to take care of a student. Please do eat or drink or take vital medications prior to walking into the lab door. So not in the lab, but prior to coming to the lab, to prevent any medical issues that are associated with eating, drinking, or taking medication. So one thing you should look at online, there's some information posted for you, is the GHS symbols, because you might see these on your chemicals, you might see them in the lab, and you should be aware of what they mean without your professor directly telling you these. So you need to know this, especially for your safety quiz. There are other symbols that you might see in the lab. One other symbol that you might see is these triangles or these diamond-shaped things that look at reactivity, flammability, and health.